All right, so let me introduce Glenn. Glenn Perricone is the STEM and School Outreach Coordinator at the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. He is completing his master's degree in biology with an emphasis on bird conservation and community-based conservation. Glenn began birding in 2011 and has since become a leader in DuPage County's bird watching community, leading outings and monitoring birds. He has observed, get this, 279 species of bird in DuPage County, finding more than 250 of those in DuPage Forest Preserves. And now I will turn the mic over to Glenn. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Glenn.
Thank you, Barry, and also thank you to the Wheaton Public Library for inviting me to speak this evening. And also thank you to all of these participants for joining. It's great to see so many people come and tune in and hear about birds. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here this evening presenting the birds of Lincoln Marsh. And so we're just gonna jump right in because I could talk all night about birds. The birds of Lincoln Marsh, you know, despite being a smaller forest preserve, Lincoln Marsh has had over 158 species of bird documented at the site. So my goal over the next hour is to introduce you to a number of those birds. A quick overview of this program, we will consider 3 important factors when searching for birds. We will familiarize with the different habitats that are found within Lincoln Marsh, and we will then highlight the different species of bird which are found in those habitats. And I will be sure to leave time at the end for questions as well. So without further ado, let us begin. When bird watching and searching for birds, there are 3 factors that we need to consider which will determine what species of birds we find. The first is the time of day. Are we bird watching in early morning when the birds are singing their dawn songs and are actively feeding and foraging? Or are we bird watching in mid-afternoon when the sun and the temperatures are at their highest? Perhaps we're birding in the evening or at night. Regardless, we're gonna find different species of birds at different times of day. I wouldn't generally look for an owl in the early afternoon, and I would also not expect certain songbirds to be singing past noon. So it's important to know at what times of day certain birds are active. Next is, what is the time of year? There are a number of species of bird that live in northern Illinois year-round. However, there are some species of bird that are strictly migratory through this region, and we only see them in April and May during spring migration, and then in August through October during fall migration. Many species of bird that migrate to DuPage County in the spring will then stay and spend the summer here where they establish their breeding territories. Other birds that breed much farther north are generally fall or winter visitors to Illinois and DuPage County. So it's important to know what birds are in the area at any given time of year. The third factor is habitat. Different birds prefer different types of habitat, and so we're going to search different habitats in order to find a greater diversity of bird species. And I cannot think of a better place with diverse habitats than Lincoln Marsh in Wheaton. So we're going to go on a virtual bird watching tour, if you may, and learn about these different birds that are at Lincoln Marsh. Lincoln Marsh is a 150-acre natural area that has shared ownership between a number of agencies, primarily the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County and the Wheaton Park District. Today, the Wheaton Park District manages and operates the natural areas at Lincoln Marsh. The Forest Preserve does consult when it comes to a number of conservation initiatives. So we will begin our tour in the parking lot, which is located at the corner of Harrison Avenue and Pierce Avenue in Whedon. There is a small parking lot there that could fit about 10 cars, I would say. The other main access to Lincoln Marsh is the Illinois Prairie Path. A lot of folks will ride their bikes to Lincoln Marsh or walk on the Prairie Path to visit Lincoln Marsh. So the first habitat type that we are going to come across from the parking lot, immediately we turn and there is woodlands. Looking at the map, the area shaded in green, these are the woodland habitats at Lincoln Marsh. The western woodlands are predominantly successional woodlands that are very young or less than 100 years old, and they tend to be dominated by maples and cherry and walnut trees. Now the center woodland is a remnant oak savanna. Unlike the western woodland, which is going to be very brushy and have a dense understory, this savanna and the eastern woodland are much more open in the understory. And we'll find that there is a difference in the bird species that can be found in these different types of woodlands. The next habitat that we find is wetland. Lincoln Marsh is predominantly a wetland and has standing water throughout much of the preserve. Looking at the map, the areas shaded in blue tend to have standing water most of the year. Throughout the year, the water levels fluctuate, and there could be much more water and sometimes less water depending on rain events. And this will affect what birds we find. In the center wetland, there are two open water areas that provide great wildlife viewing. There is a floating boardwalk that extends out into this area, and one of the extensions even has a bird blind where you can observe birds and other wildlife. And typically, the wildlife are not bothered by people. They tend not to see us, or they'll forget about us if we just sit still and stay in the blind. So other habitats at Lincoln Marsh include open meadow as well as scrub or shrub habitats. And these habitats are generally characterized as not having tree canopy cover. So looking at the map, the area shaded in red shows that there's not much of these habitats, mostly just in the northwest and the southeast end of the preserve. But there are still some unique species of bird that we will search for in those habitats. So now that we are a bit familiar with the different types of habitat at Lincoln Marsh, let's take a look at the birds that we will be finding in those habitats. The first habitat that we are going to visit is the woodlands. So during the summertime, when we visit Lincoln Marsh, we're going to hear a lot of different bird songs and calls. And one of those birds that sings throughout the entire day, a very melodic whistly song, is the Baltimore Oriole. And this is one of our summer breeding birds that builds a hanging basket nest high in the tree canopy. Now, if you look under the bird's name, there are bar charts. And that bar chart is broken down by month, and within each month, it's broken down into 4 weeks. So this bar chart tells us that the Baltimore Oriole is present at Lincoln Marsh starting the last week of April and through the end of August. The green bars become taller as the frequency of Baltimore Oriole sightings increase at Lincoln Marsh. These bar charts are provided by courtesy of ebird.org. You can visit eBird to look at more of these bar charts. So the next bird that we would undoubtedly hear on a summer day is the eastern Wood-Pewee, a bird named for his pewee call. This bird belongs to the flycatcher family and is a common summer breeding bird throughout DuPage County. They have a medium, or they're a medium size flycatcher, and they have a crest on their head. So these birds can be heard singing throughout most of the day at Lincoln Marsh, and sometimes even into the nighttime. The Indigo Bunting, this bird is pretty much ubiquitous to all of the woodlands at Lincoln Marsh. This summer breeding bird is related to the northern cardinal. It has a large bill for cracking seeds and also eating insects. But we will listen for this bird's song, a frantic series of repeating notes. And we'll keep an eye out for movement on open branches in the mid-level canopy. But I've found that it's rare that I visit Lincoln Marsh in the summer and miss seeing this blue-colored bird. They are very abundant at Lincoln Marsh. Another bird related to the cardinal is the rose-breasted grosbeak. These birds have a large bill for cracking open seeds and are recognized for their white wing patches and that bleeding heart pattern on their chest. Grosbeaks are a summer breeding bird at Lincoln Marsh, and they could be heard singing throughout much of the summer. Because these birds nest well into Canada, we'll often see these birds migrating well into the fall as well. So a third species of bird related to the cardinal is the Scarlet Tanager. So I feel like I rarely see a photo of these birds that really do justice to that brilliant flaming red color that this bird is. Scarlet Tanagers can be differentiated from cardinals by their slightly thinner and longer flesh-colored bill, but also their black wings. When in the woods, we'll often hear Scarlet Tanagers before we see them. They sing from high up in the canopy, and typically these birds, they stop singing their song before noon. The next woodland bird that I would like to highlight is the blue-gray gnatcatcher. So this is one of our smallest birds in DuPage County. It's really only larger than hummingbirds. These little guys, they hop and bip around in the tree canopy, searching for small insects and caterpillars. They're recognizable not only for being a little white puffball with a tail when seen from the underside, but they have a wheezy little call, little bzz, 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 bzz. So one of my favorite bird watching experiences at Lincoln Marsh happened in late April a few years ago. I was watching a male blue-gray gnatcatcher building his tiny cup nest, but periodically he would interrupt his work of weaving these little thin grasses together, and he would flutter into the air and come back. And I couldn't quite figure out at first what it was he was doing, but after watching for a few moments, I realized that he was launching himself off the branch that his nest was on, and he was grabbing a cottonwood fluff as it would float past, and he would do this with such incredible precision. And then he would take that little cottonwood fluff back to the nest, and he would meticulously work it into all of his weaves. So I always appreciate getting to see really neat behaviors like that. It's one of the things that makes bird watching very enjoyable. The red-bellied woodpecker is one of our most common birds in DuPage County. Although it's hard to see this, it's easy that these birds are very abundant and can often be seen at folks' bird feeders and in a variety of woodland habitats. So They're called the red-bellied woodpecker. They do have the slightest reddish hue on their belly. But notice that they also have a red mullet, at least I joke and call it a mullet, that extends from their beak all the way to their back. But that red, it doesn't actually wash the entire head. Now compare that to the next bird, the red-headed woodpecker. So this is a bird of concern for our woodlands in DuPage County. A large-scale habitat loss has led to population declines for red-headed woodpeckers throughout much of northern Illinois. The species tends to be particular to mature woodlands and old-growth oak savannas. They like to nest in dead trees and snags, which is why I always recommend that folks don't cut down dead trees in their yard if it's safe to leave them up. A lot of wildlife will utilize dead trees and snags. One thing that we notice is that red-headed woodpeckers prefer woodlands that have a clean or at least a low understory. Our next woodland bird is the northern flicker. This is another bird species of concern, and like the red-headed woodpecker, the northern flicker has also seen population declines due to habitat loss. So there are two subsets of the northern flicker: the yellow-shafted flicker, which occurs in the eastern United States, and the red-shafted flicker, which occurs in the western United States. If we look at this picture, we can see that the feather shaft on this flicker's tail is yellow, and that vein or that shaft is on the flight feathers and the wings is going to be yellow throughout the eastern populations of northern flickers and the flickers that we will see at Lincoln Marsh. So a really fascinating behavior that flickers do is what bird watchers refer to as anting. So anting is the practice of coming down to the ground and catching ants. And it's not uncommon to see flickers on the ground catching ants. They will catch the ant and then they'll pop the ant with the end of their beak and then apply the formic acid that squirts out across the surface of their feathers as a means to limit the parasite load on them. So just another really interesting behavior. And it's always odd to see a woodpecker pecking on the ground. Although most flickers migrate south for the winter, there are a couple hardy individuals that will stay in DuPage County through the winter. So another bird, the eastern bluebird, this is a bird that prefers oak savanna habitat at Lincoln Marsh. This breeding bird is one of our first migrants to return in the spring and will spend most of March and April searching for a suitable cavity in a tree to be a nest site. But bluebirds too have also been the victim of habitat loss, and their populations have been declining. So at Lincoln Marsh, the Forest Preserve District and the Park District have set up bluebird nest boxes, which are regularly utilized every year by breeding eastern bluebirds. It's a lot of fun watching these nest boxes and waiting for a little blue and orange head to pop out of the hole. As the season progresses, eventually curious baby bluebirds will start peeking out of the hole until they eventually fledge and leave their box in July. Bluebird boxes are very reliable places to look for bluebirds at Lincoln Marsh. The eastern Phoebe is another flycatcher distinguishable from the eastern Pewee by his round and dark cap. Like the Pewee, the Phoebe was also named for his call. Phoebe, Phoebe. This little bird is fun to watch as they flutter into the air and they catch midges and gnats, and then they return to the same spot on a branch, repeating this process over and over. Flutter, back to the same spot. Flutter, 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 back to the same spot. Once perched, the eastern phoebe will often pump its tail up and down. This is a very characteristic behavior for the eastern phoebe, and it makes them very recognizable, but also conspicuous because our eyes will catch that motion. So phoebes nest on the edges of woodlands, but especially near water. They will also often build their little mud nests on man-made structures. So underneath bridges, on ledges, on buildings. At Lincoln Marsh, they from time to time have built their nests on the team's course structures. So keep an eye out for phoebes in the team's course area, and then also by water. The last two birds in the woodlands that I would like to highlight are winter birds. The first is the brown creeper, a migrating songbird that will often overwinter at Lincoln Marsh. In the dead of the winter, these tiny little birds, they give me a reason to go out in the cold and visit our forest preserves. Looking for them is a lot of fun, and watching them as they creep up the sides of mature trees in a spiraling motion, and that will take them from the base of the tree pretty much to the lower branches of the tree before they hop off that tree, and they'll fly down to the base of the next tree, and then they'll repeat the process of spiraling their way up the trunk. And as they're creeping up the tree, it's really fascinating to watch them flake away bark and pick out hibernating insects. By the end of April, our overwintering brown creepers have migrated back north. I enjoy going out to Lincoln Marsh in late winter mornings after the sun has been up a few hours and has warmed the eastern facing of woodlands. And that's when you can generally see brown creepers. So our final woodland bird that we will highlight is a crowd pleaser, none other than the great horned owl. So the great horned owl, or the hoot owl, is our most common owl species in DuPage County. Really starting in late October, but through November and December, great horned owls become very vocal as they begin establishing their breeding territories. By midwinter, these owls have commandeered the nest of a crow or a hawk, or they found a large cavity in a tree, and they'll have laid their eggs by the beginning of March. So Lincoln Marsh is open until sunset, and that provides a great opportunity to hear or see a sneak peek at these incredible birds. Get out to Lincoln Marsh in the last hour before sunset, especially in those weeks leading up to daylight savings switch in the fall, and those will be great opportunities to hear these great horned owls and their ooh, ooh, ooh calls. So from the woodlands, we are going to head to the next habitat, the wetlands. And our first wetland bird also happens to be a woodland bird. And these are wood ducks. So wood ducks are small dabbling ducks that eat vegetation, and they're a species that returns to DuPage County in March and will stay the entire summer as a breeding bird, and then will begin migrating back south in October. These ducks are very boldly patterned and brightly colored, very conspicuous ducks. However, they like to hide in the edges of cattails in our wetlands. And so, although they are colorful, they're not always easy to find. So wood ducks are very interesting in that they do not nest on the ground, but instead in tree cavities. They will, they'll nest up in trees. And so there's been many visits, especially in April and early May, to the marsh where I find wood ducks sitting up in the open in trees in the oak savanna and on the edge of the western woods at Lincoln Marsh, where it borders the open water areas. And often in the early morning, these birds will be perched on tree branches, and especially in late winter, they'll be sunbathing up there. But throughout the day, they will then fly down into the marsh and can often be viewed from the bird blind. So just like some of our other cavity nesting birds, people help with wood ducks by putting up wood duck nest boxes at Lincoln Marsh. And these nest boxes tend to be located near or above water at the marsh. And if you can be lucky enough to find a nest box that is actually occupied by a wood duck, it's a great experience to visit, week after week, and see how the wood ducks change their behaviors from when they're just chosen that box to when they lay their eggs to when they have ducklings inside. And then eventually all of those ducklings will jump out of that nest box, and the mother wood duck will stay with her babies in the wetland areas. The adults tend not to fly away once they have ducklings, so they are, again, a little bit more easy to see in the open water areas during the summertime. So another species of dabbling duck that occurs at Lincoln Marsh is the blue-winged teal. The male has a large white crescent on his face, and note how the female has an all-black bill, distinguishing her from a mallard. These ducks are actually a bit smaller than a mallard as well. So blue-winged teal are regular spring and fall migrants at Lincoln Marsh, and on very occasional summers, there have been breeding pairs of blue-winged teal that have raised young at the marsh. The next bird, the American coot, is a spring and fall migrant that stops over at Lincoln Marsh. These birds arrive in March and are generally gone by the end of April, and then they start migrating through the area again in mid-October. And occasionally they've been known to overwinter at the marsh, as long as there's enough open water, throughout the winter for them to be able to forage for aquatic vegetation. They can be seen foraging along the edges of cattails, or sometimes floating out in the middle of the water in a large group called a raft of coots. The double-crested cormorant is a summer visitor to Lincoln Marsh. This species does breed in DuPage County, although there are no records of them breeding at Lincoln Marsh. These birds return to the area in March and April, and then they'll spend the entire summer stopping by at the marsh to fish. They are diving birds related to pelicans, actually, more related to pelicans than to ducks. And they'll go underwater for several minutes and catch enough fish to take back to their nests. So one thing worth noting is that double-crested cormorants are not ducks, and unlike ducks that have waterproofing in their feathers, cormorants lack that trait, and so they need to dry off after a swim. So we will look for cormorants throughout the day, perched on logs or dead snags or trees in close proximity to water, and they'll have their wings stretched out as they sunbathe. The next bird, the great egret, is another bird species of concern that has seen declines in its population in DuPage County. This is a summer visitor to the marsh, and it breeds off-site at nearby heron rookeries. So these large white herons can be found along the edge of the water in the wetlands searching for fish. So earlier this summer, I was out at Lincoln Marsh, and I came around the corner out of the woodland and up to the boardwalk, and like simultaneously there's a great egret, and him and we like caught sight of each other, and the egret froze. And then he stood like a statue for about 5 minutes. And so I continued to walk onto the boardwalk, taking very slow steps. And eventually I was close enough and I could see that the egret was very intently staring down at the water. And then with no warning, the bird struck like lightning, and he caught a large green sunfish from the water, just like inches from his legs. The bird had stood like so still that the fish had just unknowingly swam right up under it. So I got a chuckle, you know, watching him as he tried to like rotate this large fish in his bill so that it was facing head first. And then he would put his head up and his neck would be extended as he tried to choke down this large fish. And after 2 or 3 minutes, he got the bird down into his throat. And it was really cool to watch as this large bulge moved down his long noodle neck. So another heron that can be found at Lincoln Marsh is the green heron. This is a small heron, and he can actually be easily overlooked due to his size and coloration. When approaching the open water areas of the wetlands, slowly scan the edges of the cattails and any logs that may be in the water for a green heron that may be standing still. These birds tend to be a little skittish and will usually find cattail or tree cover along the edge of the water by noon, but will be active again in the late evening before sunset. So the next bird at Lincoln Marsh is the Virginia rail, and this is a bird of concern in our wetlands. With wide-scale wetland habitat loss and fragmentation throughout DuPage County, these shy and secretive marsh birds have declined in their population. So this really is a ghost bird if there ever was one. If you're fortunate enough to be at the marsh at sunrise or that last hour before the sun is down, you may hear the bird's grunt calls. But seeing this bird is a very tricky task. These are very shy marsh birds. They are a summer breeder, and they will build their nest in the cattails, but it's really interesting that they build it just barely above the water level in the cattails. I really like that call. So our next bird, the belted kingfisher, is one of our year-round residents. These birds are aptly named as they will hunt fish by hovering and fluttering over the water, and then they drop down and they snatch their prey up with their beak. And although it's a little brutal to watch, belted kingfishers, they'll find a thick or sturdy tree branch or a rock, and they'll take the fish that they caught and they'll beat it to death against the rock before they swallow it. I suppose I wouldn't want a fish wiggling around in my throat either. So yeah, kingfishers, they can be found not only throughout the whole year, but also just throughout the daytime, flying back and forth, patrolling their territory, and calling out their loud rattle call. Another bird with a rattle call is the marsh wren. Marsh wrens are small little songbirds that live in the reeds at Lincoln Marsh, and they're extremely inquisitive and gregarious and will investigate people as they walk past, scolding and chattering at them from their hidden vantage point in the cattails. So these birds are summer breeders that arrive in May and will stay through the end of August. They can be heard singing their little chittering songs 24 hours a day. They'll sing even at nighttime. Gotta hold down that territory. All right, so the next bird is one that I had trouble picking a habitat to put it in. The common yellowthroat is a summer breeding bird that nests on the ground or very low in grasses, cattails, brush, pretty much anywhere it feels it has sufficient cover to hide from predators, but still have enough open area to have a vantage to watch for those predators. Common yellowthroats are one of our common summer breeding warblers. And they defend their territory by singing their witchetty witchetty song. Like other warblers though, this species, these birds will eventually migrate to Central America for the winter. So I enjoy watching common yellowthroats at Lincoln Marsh. These birds are busybodies and they're always up to something, whether it's defending their territory or singing or chasing other birds out of their territory or carrying food back to their nest or scolding me. They're active all day and they're very fun to watch. So our last wetland bird is another that can be sorted into two habitats. The tree swallow is a small iridescent blue-green fighter jet that tears around the air over meadows and open water, picking off insects. This is another summer breeding bird, and like the bluebird, it's early to return to the area in March. These birds breed in cavities and dead snags in wetlands and meadows, usually near water. Also, like the bluebird, tree swallows utilize bluebird boxes for nesting. Tree swallows can be very bossy, and sometimes they'll chase off bluebirds and take over a bluebird box if the bluebirds haven't already built a nest inside or have eggs inside. Although the boxes are there for the bluebirds, the forest preserve in the park district, we don't typically discourage the tree swallows. They are a native species and they do depend on cavity nests. So finally, let's head out into the open meadow and scrub areas for a couple of specialty birds. First, we have the chipping sparrow. The chipping sparrow is another summer breeding bird that is particularly found in the savannas, in the scrub areas, in the open meadows, and edges of the woodlands. Pretty much anywhere though where there's low to mid-level canopy or shrubs. So these birds like to sit on the edge of a tree or a shrub, and then they sing their chipping song. These handsome little sparrows are very recognizable by their orange cap and black eyeline. And also note that they have a clean, unmarked belly, which most of our sparrows at Lincoln Marsh have markings on their bellies. The next bird, the eastern kingbird, is another bird species of concern in DuPage County. These tyrant flycatchers return to Lincoln Marsh in May, and they stay in the summer as a breeding bird. So whoever named these birds as tyrant flycatchers, they did so very properly, because the eastern kingbird is a bird that will vigorously defend his territory with fervor, and it's a fervor that is unmatched by any other bird at Lincoln Marsh. I've watched eastern kingbirds chase a red-tailed hawk a half mile out of the marsh. Then on the return trip, You know, they find an unfortunate ring-billed gull and they're nipping at his tail until he's a half mile out the opposite direction. These flycatchers are found in the meadows and the scrublands at Lincoln Marsh, and they can also be found on the edges of the woodlands where they have a wide vantage point of the open areas, and they're active throughout the entire day. Drink your tea. The eastern towhee has a very recognizable song that is given the mnemonic, drink your tea. So this is another migrant that returns early in March and will stay much of the year through October. Breeding bird that builds a cup nest in shrubs and small, like densely packed trees and scrub lines, and along woodland edges. So this next bird is a copycat. The gray catbird is a summer breeding bird that nests low in shrubs and small trees in our scrublands or along woodland edges. And these birds are mimics. They copycat other bird songs and incorporate them into their own song in order to attract a mate or maintain their breeding territory. So these birds skulk around in dense cover, shouting at passerbys from the bushes. Although they are copycat birds, they are named for the meowing call they make. Our final shrubland bird, the brown thrasher. Brown thrashers are another bird species of concern in DuPage County and has been affected by habitat fragmentation and loss. Brown thrashers are a larger cousin to the gray catbird and can be found in scrublands and woodland edges where they nest low in shrubs and small trees. And so, like the catbird, they are a mimic. However, their song can be differentiated from the catbirds because they'll sing many of their notes in doublets. So from here, there are two groups of birds that I also want to mention. They are migrants that pass through the area in spring and fall, but do not necessarily stay during the summer at Lincoln Marsh. And the first are sparrows, and these include species such as the white-throated and white-crowned sparrow, the fox sparrow, the Lincoln sparrow, and Savannah sparrow, and American tree sparrow. Moving left to right, top down. So these birds, they begin moving through the area late February or really in March, and then they'll move north where they breed, but then they return on their trip south in September. Now, some sparrows, like the white-throated sparrow or the Savannah sparrow and the tree sparrow, will overwinter in DuPage County. And so these birds can be found in a variety of habitats, but typically they like cover that they can hide in. And yeah, so we'll find them along savannas, woodlands, scrublands. The other group of birds that I want to touch on that are migrants are warblers. So there have been 26 species of warbler documented at Lincoln Marsh. From left to right, top down, we have the magnolia warbler, the northern parula, the redstart, and the golden-winged warbler, the chestnut-sided warbler, black-throated green, Blackburnian, and Canada warblers. So we get a major influx of these birds beginning in April and throughout May, and really by the first week of June, most of those migrant warblers have continued north. That being said, in the fall, starting in September, we start seeing the warblers making their way back south. And these birds will travel as far as South America. They're incredible long-distance travelers, our neotropic migrants. So there are a lot of common bird species that I did not highlight, but should not be overlooked. Species such as the Canada goose and the mallard, the great blue heron, we got the blue jay, the house wren, the white-breasted nuthatch, the cardinal, the chickadee, the song sparrow. So these are all birds that are generally year-round residents, or they at least nest in a variety of habitats. But these are species that you should become familiar with as well, because as you progress bird watching, you will need to be able to differentiate the uncommon birds from these common birds. So yeah, I want to thank you so much for joining me on our virtual bird walk through Lincoln Marsh. There are so many wonderful and fascinating birds that call this area home. Only, and I say that with air quotes, only 158 species have been observed at Lincoln Marsh, which is exactly half of the total species that have been observed in DuPage County. But recently, in the past decade, Lincoln Marsh has become a very popular bird watching spot. And I would expect that in the next decade that species list will continue to grow as more and more bird watchers visit the site. When you come out and visit Lincoln Marsh, don't forget those three factors: time of day, time of year, and type of habitat when looking for diverse birds. So thank you so much for having me, and I really enjoyed this opportunity to present about something that I'm so passionate about. I also want to thank Jeffrey Boland, who was very gracious to share all of his bird photos with me for this presentation. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. This was wonderful. We really want to thank Glenn for his generosity in giving his time and effort to provide this presentation to us through the library at no cost. So thank you so much. We'll give you all a minute or two to formulate your questions. But meanwhile, I'll just let you know that I will be sending out a follow-up email, which will include some information from the Forest Preserve about their upcoming events. And so we'll want you to know about all of that. But we do have a couple questions here. So let me go ahead and read those out loud for you, Glenn. Janine says, every so often, starting about 4 a.m., a bird starts to chip or chirp, and it goes on for hours. Do you have any clue as to what kind of bird this might be?
So most likely it's an American robin. Robins are notorious for waking up extra early and singing, but a lot of birds sing their dawn songs starting at the very first light, and that's just them getting a jump start on defending their territory for the day, keeping other birds from intruding.
Okay, great, thank you. And another person's asking, why do birds sing? What's the purpose?
Well, the two main reasons that birds sing, one is to attract a mate. If you can sing your song better than the other males, then that female's gonna swoon over you. The other reason, though, is to defend your territory. So when birds are singing their songs, what they're really saying is, hey, that's my leaf, that's my branch. Ted, get away from my rock. That's what's going on.
Okay, great. And another question is, please explain again what a flicker is doing when it is anting.
Yes, so anting is a really interesting behavior. The flickers will come down on the ground and they'll be hunting for ants, and they'll be picking them up. And then what they do is they hold the ant in the end of their beak and they pop it, and the formic acid that squirts out, they then rub their beak along the edge of their feathers, and they coat their feathers with that formic acid. And it actually helps to limit the parasite load on the flicker's body.
Interesting. Wow, very cool. Thank you. One thing that I was thinking about it as you were speaking, several times you mentioned that certain birds were birds of concern, and I was just wondering what we might be able to do or maybe not do in order to help them out.
So a lot of our birds of concern really in Illinois, DuPage County and at Lincoln Marsh, are due to habitat loss. And so, you know, DuPage County has become rather developed over the last century, and we don't see large tracts of woodlands or wetlands, and also we don't see contiguous tracts. And so a lot of birds that require larger territories, they're not able to meet that need, especially when you had maybe a wetland that was this big, but now it's this big. So you're limiting how many birds can live there. And that's why we see these population declines.
Okay, great, great. So other than not taking over the property, is there anything that we can do to help them out?
So habitat restoration has been we've been pushing habitat restoration throughout DuPage County, and our forest preserves, a lot of park districts have been restoring habitats as well. And that just creates more, opportunities for breeding territories for these birds. For some birds, offering nest sites, so like leaving up those dead trees that the birds can, build cavities into. As long as, that tree's not going to fall on your house in a windstorm, there's really not much need to take it down other than, oh, it's unsightly. Then, some folks will build bird boxes. So birds like wood ducks and bluebirds, but also purple martins will utilize certain types of bird houses. Certain owls will utilize certain types of owl boxes. And even platforms, building platforms will attract certain birds like owls or ospreys, herons. So there's a lot of different conservation initiatives that are happening in DuPage County, and hopefully they'll help the birds in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We've got another question here. Janine's not seen any blue jays by me in ages. Are they declining also?
Yes, so blue jays and American crows are both in the corvid family, not COVID, corvid. And they were both heavily impacted by West Nile virus in the early 2000s. So West Nile virus is the mosquito, is transported, through mosquitoes, and unfortunately the crows and the blue jays, that corvid family, is highly susceptible to it, more than a lot of other birds. And so those populations both crashed in the early 2000s. So blue jays have started to kind of come back up a little in population, but when we look at crows, their populations are really down. And when we look at like Christmas bird count data, we see that, prior to the early 2000s, when West Nile really hit here, crow populations were pretty high in DuPage County, and since then they've gone down and they've never really recovered.
Interesting. Okay. All right, well, I don't see any other questions just yet. We'll give you just a few more seconds here if anyone has any questions they'd like to enter into the chat. You're welcome to do that. But again, we really want to thank you, Glenn, for your time and putting this together for us. Really interesting, wonderful pictures, very well researched. So we thank you so much for doing this tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Oh, actually, you know what? We gave people enough time and they came up with some more questions.
All right.
All of a sudden, we're finding all kinds of things that we want to know about. Someone says, I'm seeing less cardinals in my backyard. Is there a reason for this?
Less cardinals in your backyard. Often people have like bird feeders in their backyard, and a cardinal's going to come and visit those feeders. But what folks don't consider is maybe they had a bush in their backyard that was starting to die and they cut it and removed it. But if there's not enough cover for your cardinals to hide from predators, then you're not going to see them as often in your backyard. The other thing is there are some bird species such as Cooper's hawks that are having an increase in population. They're actually adjusting and doing very well in urban settings. So yeah, there's a number, there could be a number of reasons why you're not seeing cardinals in your backyard. It could just simply be that the family of cardinals that had, lived in your area for generations, maybe they've all since passed.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Valerie says, we woke up to a dead mallard in the backyard. No trauma, but any ideas as to why that might have happened?
There could be a ton of different explanations. It's hard to say.
I'm thinking maybe coyote, but anyway, what do you think?
Well, no trauma though.
Okay. Oh, you're right. You're right.
So, mallards, they're, especially in your backyard, I'm assuming they were probably visiting a bird feeder or water that you have in your backyard. But if they're startled, they're going to really quickly bolt and take off. And the bird could have flown into the side of your house or a window and, maybe injured itself that way. But it's really hard to know how that mallard, passed away.
Okay. All right. And another question, can bluebird boxes be placed in backyards? Will they have any chance of being used there? After seeing the presentation, it looks like we have one we were given secondhand but never put it up. And if so, would there be a particular color for better success? It was black before, but they are going to paint it, obviously.
So no, there's no color that's gonna be particularly better than anything. Usually we just leave our boxes natural wood. We sometimes don't even, seal them or stain them just because you don't want that stuff to get on the birds or on their eggs. Can you put bluebird boxes in your backyard? Yes. And will they be used? Yes, but probably not by bluebirds. So unless you have nice, mature, large trees in your backyard and it's a big open space, what you're more likely to get in your bluebird boxes are going to be house wrens or house sparrows.
Okay. All right. Any more questions out there? Oh, we've got, I've had birds bump into my patio window. Would putting up decals help? They asked. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Short answer, yes. Breaking up that reflection on that glass will help to limit or prevent birds from flying into your windows. Some folks, they'll buy, really fancy, cute decals online. A pad of Post-it notes works really well too.
Okay. Yeah, just for them to break up that reflection, as you say. Great, great. Okay. All right, folks, any more questions out there? All right, well, we will be putting up those links to the Forest Preserve with their upcoming events calendar in a follow-up email. The recording of this program will also be available on the library's YouTube page. So again, you'll be able to watch it again and recommend it to other people. It'll be up within a couple of days or so you can watch it again. So other than that, I think we are done. I don't see any more questions. Oh, you know what? Let me double check the chat and see if there's anything else different in there. Just lots of thank yous about, it was very informative. Loved the pictures. Oh, here's another, oh, maybe that, we did get to that question. Yeah, that question they put in both the chat and the Q&A, so we got it. All right. Thank you so much, Glenn. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all those that participated tonight. We really appreciate you being here with us for this great information. Everybody take care and have a great night.